Welcome to the End of Eternity channel. Here we talk about the universe, quietly but deeply, about what scares and fascinates at the same time. Someday everything we know will disappear, but how exactly will the universe itself end? Subscribe, and let's look at the end of time together. 1 trillion years have passed. Time has ceased to mean anything. No one counts it anymore. Stars are no longer born. The last flares died out billions of years ago. Once they ignited life, warm planets illuminated the darkness. Now everything has died down. The milky rivers of the galaxies melted into the silent void. Space stretched beyond recognition, as if the very fabric of the universe had been torn into infinitely thin threads. Once upon a time the universe breathed, with the birth and death of stars, supernova explosions, the whisper of light. Now she is silent. The cold is endless, and there are no more places where even a particle of warmth could find refuge. Planets are destroyed, worlds are forgotten, the memory of civilizations has crumbled to dust. Once upon a time they looked to the sky like we do, searching for answers, hoping to find meaning. But even their shadows have long since dissolved. All that remains are traces, too faint to be read. In this boundless darkness drifts the last photon, a tiny particle of light. He flies, not knowing why. Not to the star, there are none anymore. Not to the observer, there is no one else to look. It just exists. His way, eternity, his meaning, movement. As photon once left a star born in a galaxy that no longer exists. He flew through myriads of worlds, through space full of life and sounds. It could illuminate the surface of the planet where someone first looked up at the sky and realized how endless the world was. But now all this is in the past. Now he, the last witness, he doesn't know that he is the last one. He doesn't know that he carries within himself the memory of the universe, of those who dreamed, loved, believed. He just goes, cutting through infinity, like the last breath of light in an ocean of darkness. The space around him is expanding faster than he can move. The horizon line recedes, and even light loses the ability to catch up with itself. Everything disintegrates into silence. Everything strives for balance, for ideal silence. The once boiling energy of the universe has cooled down. The protons decayed, the neutrons disappeared. Matter has lost its meaning of existence. Only rare flashes of decay remain, random sparks in the endless cold that fade away faster than they can be noticed. The darkness is not evil. She just is. She was always there, like the opposite of light, like a reflection of all living things. Now she was left alone. And if someone could now look at the universe from the outside, he would see not greatness, not catastrophe, but peace. Perfect, endless peace. No sounds, no movements. Only silence. Only eternal night, stretching for endless trillions of light years. But in this darkness, that same photon still flies. Last, he is too weak to warm, too old to light the way. But it is there. And in his existence, a quiet resistance to oblivion. He may not know his mission. Maybe he just continues because he doesn't know any other way. As humanity, stars, galaxies once continued. While they could, they burned. As long as time existed, they moved. While there was a point, we searched. Now everything is stopped. Everything froze in eternal emptiness. And somewhere there, between nothingness and what once was, a question arises. Maybe this is not the end? Perhaps it is in this absolute darkness, in this cold infinity, that the beginning of something new is hidden. Perhaps the last spark of light has not only survived, but is waiting for the moment to light the universe anew. After all, even darkness is not eternal. She is only a pause between the breaths of space. Theory 1. Heat death. When we talk about the end of the universe, we almost always start with the cold. From the silence that comes not from an explosion, but from fading. This version of the end is not a sudden catastrophe, but a slow fading, as if the cosmos falls asleep and never wakes up again. Scientists call this the heat death of the universe. This idea was born not from fantasy, but from one of the most fundamental laws of nature, the second law of thermodynamics. It states that any system tends to equilibrium and energy to dissipation. If you pour hot coffee and leave it on the table, it will cool down. The heat will escape into the air, and eventually the temperature of the coffee and the room will equalize. The energy will not disappear, but it will become useless. She won't be able to do her job anymore. Now imagine that instead of a cup of coffee, the entire universe. Once upon a time it was hot, dense, boiling energy. After the Big Bang, the temperature of space was such that matter and radiation were one, and all space was a blinding ocean of light. But with every million years the universe expanded, cooled, became calmer. Stars were born, burned, exploded. They illuminate galaxies, created the elements from which planets and life emerged. But every flash of a star is a step towards loss of energy, a step towards balance. The idea of heat death was born in the 19th century, when physicists first realized that entropy, a measure of disorder, always increases. This was first discussed by Rudolf Clausius, one of the fathers of thermodynamics. He noted that if we apply this law not to a cup of coffee, but to the entire universe, the conclusion is inevitable. Everything will eventually reach a state where the energy is distributed evenly, and nothing else can change. Maxwell, Boltzmann, Gibbs, they all added details to this idea until a picture emerged of a dead, frozen universe, where the temperature is the same everywhere, and nothing can be born again. It's not an explosion, not a collapse, not the apocalypse. This fading of light, slow and inexorable. Heat death is the moment when the universe reaches maximum entropy. No processes are possible anymore because there are no differences in temperature, no gradients that could make energy move. There is no hot and cold, no up and down, no movement. Only balance, perfect, absolute, and paradox. Equally lifeless. Scientists sometimes call this universal peace. Not death in the usual sense, but a state where there is nothing left to die. When all the stars burn out, white dwarfs cool down, neutron stars stop glowing, even black holes evaporate, energy will remain, but in a form that is no longer capable of changing anything. According to astrophysicists' calculations, if the universe really continues to expand forever, then in 10 to the power of 100 years there will not be a single object left that could be called living, or even material, in the usual sense. The protons will decay, the electrons will dissolve in the background of weak radiation, and all the energy will be distributed evenly throughout space. Imagine a void where the temperature is close to absolute zero, minus 273.15 degrees Celsius. Not cold in the human sense, but the absence of any warmth. No molecules, no atoms, just rare photons flying through space that can no longer be distinguished from time itself. Everything that once existed, light, matter, life, consciousness, will turn into a thin whisper of uniform energy that is unable to do anything except be. This is the heat death, the moment when space ceases to be space and becomes eternal peace. The idea seems scary, but there is also a strange sense of completion in it. It's as if the universe is simply going through its natural cycle, from hot birth to cold rest. Like a man who has lived a long life and finally fell asleep. However, not all scientists agree that this is how it will all end. Some doubt that heat death is the true end, because everything in space obeys not only the laws of thermodynamics, but also the laws of quantum mechanics. And in the quantum world, nothing stands still, even when it seems that everything is STO. Ped. At the level of elementary particles, even in absolute silence, fluctuations, random bursts of energy are possible. And if there are enough such fluctuations, then somewhere, after unimaginably long periods of time, a new, little bang may be born. A new point from which everything will start all over again. The new universe, like an echo of the old. It almost sounds like hope. Although from a human point of view, hope is meaningless. No one will be there to see it. But nature itself seems to need no witnesses. She just does what she always does, creates, destroys, and creates again. There is another reason for doubt. Some physicists believe that dark energy, which is accelerating the expansion of the universe, could change the outcome. If its properties are unstable, if it ever weakens or disappears, space may stop expanding. It might even start to shrink, and then everything will go differently. But so far, observations suggest otherwise. Dark energy is not just stable, it is growing. Galaxies are moving away from each other at an ever-increasing rate, and this process seems to have no end. If so, then heat death is not just a hypothesis, but the most probable fate of the universe. It is a strange fate, an end without an event, an ending without a final scene. Not an explosion, not a catastrophe, but the disappearance of the meaning of time. And maybe that's why this theory seems so creepy. Because man is accustomed to the fact that everything dies with a scream, and not with silence. Someday, trillions upon trillions of years from now, the cosmos will fall into equilibrium. Every particle, every ray of light will become part of one calm, motionless background. And then, there will be nothing left but the very idea of existence, without form, without movement, without purpose. But perhaps even in this piece a new plan is hidden. Maybe heat death is not death, but a transition. Not a period, but a comma in the infinite sentence of being. We don't know. That's why there are other theories. Those in which the universe does not fall asleep, but explodes again. Those where peace turns into chaos, and the end into the beginning. More about this later. The second theory, she is completely different. If heat death is slow sleep, then the next version of the end of the universe is sudden awakening. Theory 2, the Big Rip. If heat death is a slow, almost imperceptible departure, then the big break is the ending that doesn't wait forever. This is an end that does not come after trillions of years of peace, and a storm that tears the very fabric of space apart. The Big Divide, a theory that was not born in the era of philosophical conjecture, and in the era of precise observations. It all started with a question that seemed simple. Is the expansion of the universe accelerating? Scientists knew that space was expanding after the Big Bang. This discovery belongs to Edwin Hubble, who in 1929 noticed that galaxies were moving away from each other. The further, the faster. It seemed logical that over time, this expansion would slow down. Gravity should pull everything back. But at the end of the 20th century, astronomers noticed something strange. Expansion is not just not slowing down, it is accelerating. This discovery came as a shock. In 1998, two independent teams, one led by Saul Perlmutter, the other by Brian Schmidt and Adam Rees, observed supernova explosions in distant galaxies. They measured distances by the brightness of these explosions, and therefore the speed at which the universe is stretching. The results left no doubt. Galaxies are running away faster and faster, as if someone invisible was pulling space outward. To explain this, scientists introduced the concept of dark energy, a mysterious force that permeates all space and pushes galaxies away from each other. We don't know anything about her. We are not even sure if it exists in the usual sense. But without it, acceleration cannot be explained. Dark energy, like an invisible pressure, which bursts into the very fabric of reality. The Big Divide is a theory which takes the idea of dark energy to its limits. If this pressure increases over time, If his strength increases, then the moment will come when it will conquer everything. Not only the attraction of galaxies, but also the gravity of stars, atoms, and even elementary particles. Everything will begin invisibly. First, the galaxies will stop sticking together. The forces of dark energy will become stronger than gravity, and each galaxy will go its own way, accelerating faster and faster. In billions of years, even the nearest stars will disappear. The night sky as we know it will turn black. Even if someone looks at him, he will see only emptiness. The light of the stars will no longer reach other stars. The universe will disintegrate into islands of loneliness. But the process won't stop there. Dark energy will grow. With every billion years, it gets faster and faster. And the moment will come when its power will exceed even the attraction of the star to its own planet. Solar systems will be destroyed. The planets will fly out of their orbits and go on an eternal flight into the void. Then, the stars, they won't be able to withstand the pressure of the growing space. The gravitational bonds within them will weaken, and the stars will literally be torn apart, not by an explosion, but by an expansion of the very structure of space, which pulls them from within. Further, galaxies. What was once a spiral will turn into a trail of light, which will stretch to infinity. Everything we see through telescopes today, magnificent clusters, stellar arms, centers where black holes lurk, all this will disappear as if it never existed. But this is not the end. If dark energy continues to increase, she won't stop even at the limits of the atom. First, it will break the gravitational bonds, then electromagnetic, and when they too give in, atoms will cease to exist. Protons and neutrons will be torn from each other, and even quarks, the smallest building blocks of matter, will be separated by space itself. Then not only matter will disappear, the very possibility of the existence of matter will disappear. Space will be torn apart, and time will lose its meaning, because there will no longer be a connection between before and after. This is the big divide. The moment when the expansion of the universe becomes infinite, and all the forces that held it together disappear. No explosion, no last light, only infinite stretching, where every point of existence becomes separate, closed in on herself, and eventually dissolves. According to astrophysicists' calculations, if dark energy is indeed increasing, then the Big Rip could happen in 20 to 22 billion years. This is very soon in cosmic terms. For us, eternity. For the universe, just a moment. But for now, no one knows. Is this really where it all leads? The problem is that we don't understand what dark energy is. It doesn't emit light, does not interact with matter, and it cannot be captured, measured, or replicated in a laboratory. We see only its trace, the acceleration of galaxies. Therefore, our conclusions are not based on direct facts, and on observations and models. It may be that dark energy is not constant, that she is fickle, like the breath of space. If she ever weakens, the expansion of the universe will slow down, and no big rip will happen. Maybe the universe will just freeze, as in the heat-death theory, or even begin to shrink back. But if dark energy is indeed growing in power, everything that exists is doomed. From galaxies to molecules, even the light won't have time to go out. It will stretch out, its wavelength will become infinite, and he will disappear, dissolving into the darkness, which has no boundaries. This idea is scary, but there is also a strange grandeur in it. The Big Rip is the end where the universe does not fade away and explodes outward, as if she is trying to escape from herself. This is the end, full of movement, energy, and in it, there is something alive, even in destruction. Some feel as off. Heirs say, if it is heat death, it is death of old age. Then the Big Rip is the death of madness. In both cases, the result is the same, peace. But the path to it is different. And yet, as with any theory of the end, there is room for doubt here. We look at space from Earth, from a small point in one of hundreds of billions of galaxies. Our observations are tiny bursts of data, collected in a measly 100 years, and the universe lives in trillions. Maybe we're just watching her breathe, the moment when she inhales before she exhales. We don't know yet. But if the big divide is real, then the end of the universe will be quick, not eternal fading. And in the last moment of rage, and perhaps it is in this rage that something new begins. Because if space is torn apart, what will prevent another from being born on its ruins? We can't know for sure. But there is a theory in which the universe not only dies and comes back. It doesn't disappear, it starts again. It doesn't sink in the cold and doesn't tear apart, but does what he does best, is born from its own death. Theory 3. The Big Collapse. If it's heat death, it's slow sleep. And the Big Rip, the storm that tears everything apart. Then the Great Collapse is the return home. This is the idea that the universe will not die, and one day it will gather back to a point where it all began. It once seemed like a natural ending. After all, if space ever exploded, this means that the opposite movement may await him. Compression, in which everything will return to the beginning again. The Big Collapse theory was born almost simultaneously with the idea of the Big Bang itself. In the 1920s and 1930s, when scientists first realized that the universe is expanding, the logical question sounded by itself: what if this expansion is not eternal? The first person to think about this seriously was Albert Einstein. His equations of general relativity predicted that space cannot be motionless. It either expands or contracts. But the astronomers of that time believed that the universe was stable. So Einstein added a special, artificial, term to the equations, the so-called cosmological constant, to balance gravity and make space static. Later, when Hubble discovered that galaxies were indeed moving apart, Einstein called this step his greatest mistake. But his idea did not die. Because if the equations allow the universe to expand, they also allow for its compression. This is how the hypothesis emerged. If gravity is stronger than the expansion rate, then sooner or later she will take over. And then everything that is now being removed will start to come back. Galaxies will slow down their movement. Then they will stop. And then they will start falling towards each other, squeezing under the weight of its own weight. It will all start slowly, unnoticed. It was as if the universe had breathed in, and now prepares to exhale. First, gravity will defeat dark energy. If she ever weakens, the expansion will stop. The cosmos, which for billions of years has been flying apart in all directions, will begin to shrink. Galaxies will come closer, collide, merge. At first rare, then more often, until the entire visible cosmos turns into one gigantic cluster of matter. The temperature will start to rise. The light will become brighter, the stars hotter. The density of space will increase. With each second, the distances between particles will decrease. The planets will be destroyed. The stars will merge into monstrous fiery masses. Black holes will swallow everything around. And then they will begin to get closer to each other. More and more energy. Less and less space. The density increases, time accelerates. At some point, gravity will become so strong that even space-time will stop resisting. And then that's it. All galaxies, light, matter, even the darkness itself, curl up into a single point, the point of infinite density and temperature, the same as the universe might have been at the very first moment. This is the Big Collapse. Great compression. An ending that doesn't destroy, but returns. The end that closes the circle. This idea is beautiful, almost poetic. She says that nothing ever disappears for Eve. That everything that is born, sooner or later returns to the source. Many 20th century physicists saw this as more than just a scientific hypothesis. And the symbolic conclusion, the universe, like a giant heart, which sometimes expands and sometimes contracts. It beats, lives, breathes. When scientists discovered the cosmic microwave background radiation in the 1960s, echo of the Big Bang itself, it seemed that the collapse theory had taken on new meaning. If we have a trace of birth, maybe someday we'll see a trace of return. But later new observations came, and they changed everything. At the end of the 20th century, astronomers measured the speed at which distant galaxies were moving away, and realized that it is not just preserved, but growing. That very discovery of dark energy, which formed the basis of the Big Rip theory, was a blow to the idea of collapse. If space is indeed accelerating its expansion, then no gravity can bring everything back. In such a world, the great collapse is impossible. The universe will simply stretch to infinity and cool down. However, not all scientists agree with this verdict. Some believe that dark energy may be unstable, that she is not an eternal force, but a temporary manifestation, part of a cycle that we simply cannot see in its entirety. If dark energy weakens, expansion will slow down. If she disappears completely, gravity will become dominant again, and then the countdown will begin. It may not happen in billions and in trillions of years, but on the scale of eternity, it doesn't matter. The universe is in no hurry, and so space begins to shrink. The sky is darkening not from the cold, and from the light that no longer has time to come out. The stars are falling towards the center. Galaxies are merging, and the temperature rises, as if the world were returning to the fire of its birth. At this point in time, it ceases to be familiar. Seconds shrink like space. The processes are accelerating. Every moment becomes shorter than the previous one, as if the universe itself is in a hurry to complete its circle. And finally, everything is compressed into one dazzling point, where distances, directions, and forms disappear. No stars, no worlds, only infinite density, in which is contained everything that once was. This is the end, and perhaps the beginning, because the big collapse theory gives rise to another thought. What if at the place of this point, will there be a new explosion? New universe, from the ashes of the old, from its energy, its matter, its memory. This is how the idea of a pulsating universe arises. A cycle where every end becomes a birth, where everything repeats itself, where there is no beginning and no ending, and there is an endless rhythm, the breath of space. Maybe that's just how things work. Not only stars that are born and die, but the universe itself obeys this law. Eternal pulse, eternal movement from light to darkness and back. It is not yet possible to prove this scientifically. We see only a tiny fragment of her story, just one beat from the endless heart. Maybe we live inside a cycle, which was repeated countless times, and it will happen again. But even if this is so, for us, it's still the end. We won't see the next round. We will disappear long before, as the universe breathes again. And yet, there is consolation in this. Peace, understanding that nothing is lost, but simply becomes something else. Maybe this is what eternity is. Not endless life, an endless return. Thus ends the third theory. 3 different destinies of one universe. Fading, rupture, and compression. 3 views on one question. What awaits us at the end? Boo. T at this end. there is also the beginning of reflection about ourselves, about what it means to exist in the world, which will one day disappear. Because maybe the answer to the question is, how will the universe end? Starts from another. Why was she there at all? Theory 4. The Big Bounce. Imagine the universe is shrinking. Galaxies are moving closer together, stars are colliding, matter is becoming denser, until the whole cosmos turns into one blinding point, the very one from which it all once began. This is the end, according to the Big Collapse. But what if this point doesn't die? What if she is breathing? This idea gave rise to a theory that scientists call the Big Bounce. It was born from the desire to answer the main question: what was there before the Big Bang? Most cosmological models believe that time began precisely at the moment of the explosion. Before this, there was no space, no matter, no before itself. But not everyone agreed with this. Some physicists felt it's too easy to think that everything just started. The universe does not have to be the only act of creation. What if it's a cycle? The idea of the Big Bounce arose as a natural extension of the collapse theory. If space can expand and contract, then perhaps it does this indefinitely. Like the lungs of a living being. Expansion, inhale. Squeeze, exhale. And every exhalation is followed by a new inhalation. The first hints of such a possibility appeared at the beginning of the 20th century. French mathematician and priest Georges Lemaitre, one of the authors of the Big Bang concept, assumed that the moment of the birth of the universe, not a beginning, but a transition. Later, when Einstein, Friedman, and Tolman developed solutions to the equations of general relativity, it became clear, under certain conditions, the universe may indeed not perish, and bounce back, avoiding the singularity. A singularity is the point where the laws of physics stop working. Temperature, density, curvature of space, everything becomes infinite. But infinity, in physics, is not an answer, but an alarm signal. This means the model is incomplete. This is where quantum physics came into play. On the smallest scale, where gravity and matter intertwine, everything behaves differently. Space is not infinitely divisible. It is quantized. Consists of tiny cells of energy, like fabrics woven from invisible threads. And if so, then the universe cannot collapse to absolute zero. She will reach her own limits. And when it reaches this border, will bounce back, like a ball compressed under pressure, and then shooting upwards. In this picture, the end of the world turns into the beginning of a new one. Compression is not death, but preparation. Energy collected by gravity. At some point it switches to the opposite state, and explodes with the birth of a new space. That moment we call the Big Bang may not be the first, but simply the last of many. Maybe before our universe, there were countless others, each one born from the ashes of the previous one, a little different, slightly modified, with other laws, another time, other opportunities for life. In such a world, eternity is not a line, but a circle. The universe knows no death. It just goes from form to form, like a fire that lights itself from its own coals. Modern physicists are not just fantasizing about this. In quantum cosmology, real equations have emerged, which describes such a process. One of the most famous models was loop quantum gravity, an attempt to unify quantum mechanics and general relativity. In this theory, space-time is not continuous, and consists of tiny loops of energy, closed like knots. When the universe contracts to its smallest size, the density of these loops reaches a critical value, and gravity changes sign. Instead of attraction, it turns into repulsion. And then, bang, the Big Bang becomes not the beginning, and as a consequence of the previous collapse. According to this model, our universe was born from another, which shrank and pushed away, and maybe someday, we will also become the basis for the next one. Of course, the Big Bounce theory has its difficulties. We don't see any direct evidence yet. Telescopes cannot look behind the Big Bang. Everything that is before the moment of relic radiation remains hidden, but in the microwave background, in the most subtle vibrations of cosmic noise, scientists are looking for traces of previous cycles, minor anomalies, spots, traces that could be echoes. Another, more ancient universe. So far these are just guesses, but the very possibility makes you think. If the universe is capable of bouncing, so death is not the end, but just a phase of breathing. There is a philosophical side too. The Great Rebound brings us back to the idea of eternal return. It sounds almost mystical, but in it there is amazing harmony. The world does not disappear. He's just going through stages. How a person goes through youth, maturity, old age, and is born again in another form. If this is true, then perhaps everything has already happened. Maybe you and I, this conversation, this star outside the window, all this has happened billions of times already, and billions more will happen, again and again, in different forms, in an eternal circle, where is oblivion just a pause between lives. But this theory also haunts scientists, because if every cycle repeats, does this mean that everything is predetermined? Or does every new universe give birth to a new freedom, a new set of laws, new physics, new destinies? If somewhere billions of new worlds are born, could one of them be a little bit different? So much so that we live in it differently. To make the stars burn longer? To make matter more stable? So that there would be no end at all? So the Big Bounce connects science and philosophy. He says, the end, this is not a stop. And the transition, not a disappearance, but a change of state. The universe knows no peace. She just changes the rhythm. When you look at the night sky, and it seems that time has stood still. In fact, everything is moving. Maybe right now somewhere far away, another universe is just being born, and the third one dies, and the cycle continues without asking our permission. This is no reason to fear. It's just the breath of eternity. And yet the question remains, if the universe really does bounce, if birth and death are one and the same, then there must be a mechanism somewhere which starts this perpetual motion. Who is he? What is he? Law of nature? Accident? Or something beyond the very concept of law? Some physicists say, maybe the Big Bounce? Not the only one. Maybe there are infinitely many of these, all. Each universe gives birth to another, but not necessarily in the same place. They can exist in parallel, in many dimensions, where each version of being, just one of countless worlds, and then the end of our universe, not just the beginning of a new one, and the transition to an infinite number of others. This thought leads us to the final theory, the most mysterious, the most abstract, but perhaps closest to the truth, theories in which the end does not exist at all, multiverse theories, or, as it is sometimes called, quantum immortality of space. Theory 5. Multiverse, immortality of space. We are used to thinking that the universe is one. What is the beginning, there is the end. And everything in between, the story we call reality. But maybe that's just one thread in the vast canvas of endless existence. The multiverse theory says, our world is not the only one. He is just one of many. Perhaps there are an infinite number of such worlds, and each of them with its own stars, laws, time, and maybe even with their own versions of us. The idea of multiple universes is not new. She was born more than once. In different minds, from different questions. In ancient times, philosophers already thought, if nature is infinite, then why should it be limited to one world? Atomists like Democritus represented countless worlds in endless space, where each combination of particles creates a new reality. But modern science has approached this from a different angle, from within the laws of physics itself. The first version of the multiverse emerged from the inflationary theory. After the Big Bang, in the first fractions of a second, space expanded unevenly. It swelled like boiling dough, forming bubbles, areas where physical conditions differed. Each such bubble could become a separate universe, with its own physical constants, by other forces, other elements. Some might be similar to ours, others alien, where matter is not capable of existing. If inflation has not stopped everywhere, and continues in different areas, then the universe is not a sphere, and an endless mosaic of bubbles. We live in only one of them, and somewhere beyond our horizon, new ones are born, flash after flash, forever without end. But there is another version, a quantum one. She was not born from cosmology, and from the mysterious behavior of particles. Quantum physics says that elementary particles can be in several states at once. A photon can pass through two slits A, T the same time. Electron spin in different directions at the same moment. Observation destroys this superposition, and the particle chooses one state. But where do the other options go? To explain this, in the 1950s, physicist Hugh Everett proposed the idea. Many worlds interpretation. Every possible outcome of a quantum event is realized just in a different branch of reality. The universe does not choose. It branches out. When you toss a coin, in one universe it falls like an eagle. In the other, tails. When you choose a path, another version of you chooses another. This is how endless branches of worlds are born, where everything that is possible exists. This is the quantum immortality of space, a paradox in which nothing disappears completely. Every possibility lives. Every outcome is realized. Even if our world perishes, others will continue to exist. Even if the universe itself ends, many others have already begun, and maybe somewhere among them, there is a universe in which there is no end at all, where the energy never fades, time does not turn back, and the stars burn forever. The multiverse destroys the very concept of end, because the end is the border, and in infinity, there are no boundaries. It makes you look at death differently, into oblivion, to loneliness. If all that can happen, it already happened somewhere, then nothing is lost. Every thought, every moment, every starlight finds its continuation, even if in another world. Some scientists consider this idea too bold. They say this is philosophy, not physics. After all, it is impossible to observe other universes. It cannot be proven that they exist. But it is impossible to prove that they do not exist. Space doesn't have to be simple, clear and logical. He just is, and perhaps it is much more complex than we can imagine. There is also a third direction, the string theory, in which different universes are different solutions. The same fundamental equations. Their space has not 3 dimensions, but 10 or 11. Some of them are twisted into tiny loops, invisible to our eyes. And in these hidden dimensions, there may be many worlds, separated not by distance, but by the very structure of reality. In one universe, gravity is stronger, in another weaker. In one time flows faster, in another slower. We just don't feel it, because we can't escape from our bubble reality. If all this is true, then the end of the universe loses its meaning. Even if our world cools down, will burst or collapse, it's just an event in one branch. The huge, eternal tree of being. And each tree itself is endless. It grows in all directions, at every moment in time, in every act of choice, in every quantum oscillation. The universe does not die. She's just putting out new branches. And every time something disappears, somewhere else something new is being born. There is also a philosophical version of this view. We can call it cosmic immortality. If in an infinite number of worlds, everything exists, then you exist too. In an infinite number of variations. Somewhere you died, alive somewhere. Somewhere he was not born at all. But in a universe without boundaries, you are always there, not as a memory, and as an infinite set of states, in which life never ceases completely. This is not a religion. This is not faith. It's just a consequence of the idea of infinity. There can be no end to infinity, even for us. And maybe that's why the universe seems so quiet. Maybe other universes are not separated from us by distance, but simply in a different direction in space, into which we do not know how to look. Maybe they are nearby, in the same place where we are, just from the other side of reality. Sometimes when you look at the sky, and you feel a strange sense of déjà vu, as if you had already seen this star field. Maybe you're just remembering another world, in which you look at the same sky, a little earlier, a little differently. The multiverse is not scary. She takes away loneliness, because if everything exists infinitely, then no one is ever truly alone. This is no consolation. It's just another way to understand that there is no darkness at the end. There is only a transition. And if you imagine that all this is true, that every world gives birth to new ones, that the end is the door, and not a wall, then maybe the universe really is immortal. Maybe even now, while we're talking about this, in another universe a new one is born, where the stars first sparkle, and someone looks at the sky and asks the same question: how will it all end? But perhaps it is more correct to ask differently: will anything ever end? Because if there are an infinite number of universes, then everything continues forever, just in different forms, in other spaces, in other lives. Thus ends the fifth theory, the most open, the most endless. She doesn't talk about death. She speaks of eternity, in which every disappearance, it's just the birth of something new. And maybe that's the answer. The universe does not seek meaning. She just exists, forever, endlessly, in all possible versions of myself. And all we can do is watch, listen, and try to understand in which of them we live now. Conclusion: reflection on eternity. The universe will disappear someday. This is what scientists say. But every time we try to imagine this end, he looks different. In one version, it's cold. In another, a gap. In the third, return. And maybe all three theories don't argue, but they just talk about the same thing, but from different sides. Death speaks of rest, about the balance that everything strives for. She reminds us that energy does not disappear, but simply dissipates, that in the end all chaos becomes silence. This painting looks like a slow sunset, on breathing, which gradually slows down, until it turns into peace. In a universe where there are no more contrasts, there is no movement. This is not the end in the usual sense. And dissolution, the transition from form to the absence of form, Perhaps this is the natural outcome of existence. Not death, but a return to balance. But balance is also a stop. And nature, it seems, cannot stand still, even at rest, even in complete balance. A movement is born anyway, at least in the form of a random fluctuation. Quantum breathing. A spark that is enough. So that everything starts again. The big gap tells a different story. Not about peace, but about strength, which knows no boundaries. About the space that does not calm down. But on the contrary, he is going crazy, stretching itself to infinity. If it's heat death, it's old age. That big divide, that frenzy of youth. There is no slow decay in it. There is only the rapid disappearance of everything that ever existed. But there is a pattern to this too. If the universe is truly filled with energy, which grows and expands, then maybe this gap is not a disaster, but just another form of life. Maybe the world is tearing itself apart to become something new, go beyond one's own boundaries. The big gap is scary, but in it there is movement, freedom, energy. It reminds us that everything is born from instability, from internal conflict, from an attempt to overcome oneself. Maybe it's not destruction and transformation, a space that ceases to be a space, to become something else, something we can't even name yet. A great collapse. This is a return. He does not destroy. He collects. He talks about the cycle, about the eternal circle, in which the end is the beginning. If death is a dream, and the big rip, the storm, then the great collapse, this is a breath, the eternal breath of the universe. He talks about peace. Who does not know final peace? Who lives, dies, and is born again, like a huge organism. Every era, every beat of his heart, every big bang, a new beat of the endless symphony. There is a strange comfort in this. We don't disappear. We just become part of the cycle. Those atoms that will return to the new sky, into the new universe, into the new world. But even if so, even if everything repeats itself, where does this cycle begin? And why does it continue? Who sets the rhythm of this breathing? All three theories, heat death, gap, and collapse, can be viewed as not mutually exclusive, and as different stages of the same path. Perhaps the universe has already gone through them all. Maybe she died of cold more than once, was torn to pieces, contracted, and was born again. Maybe all this is part of one never-ending story, which we call time. Maybe we are now living in only one of the cycles, in one of the infinite versions of the world, in which the cosmos is still young, but already carries within itself the memory of past births. And if this is so, then the end of the universe. This is not an event, and the state, not a moment, but a series of endless transformations. Each theory reflects the human way of looking at eternity. In heat death, fear of disappearance. In the big divide, fear of chaos. In the great collapse, the fear of returning there, where nothing personal remains. But behind all these fears, thirst to understand, the desire to find order in chaos, in destruction, meaning, at the end, the structure. Maybe these theories tell us more about us than about the universe itself, about how a person seeks eternity, trying to understand that he is only a brief reflect time of her. We make up words to explain that. That does not fit into the mind. We create models so as not to feel lost in front of the abyss. But maybe the universe needs no explanation. Maybe she just is, without a goal, without a plan, without beginning or end. She doesn't think about her future. She just lives, expands, contracts, fades away, and is born again, if necessary. When we say, the end of the universe, we speak human language. But for the universe itself there is no end. Because she doesn't know what the end is. She doesn't know what fear is. She doesn't know what time is. All these words are attempts to describe infinity with those concepts, which are born within the limits of life. We measure eternity with a stopwatch, and we wonder why it doesn't fit into the framework. Sometimes it seems that the answer is not which theory is correct, but the fact is that each of them, in their own way, death reminds us of peace, the big divide about movement, the great collapse about the return. Rest, movement, return. Together they form what? What can be called the life of the universe. And perhaps this is precisely the truth. Whatever happens, all this is part of one breath, one never-ending story, which no one started, and no conclusion, reflection on eternity. The universe will disappear someday. This is what scientists say. But every time we try to imagine this end, he looks different. In one version, it's cold. In another, a gap. In the third, return. And maybe all three theories don't argue, but they just talk about the same thing, but from different sides. Death speaks of rest, about the balance that everything strives for. She reminds us that energy does not disappear, but simply dissipates, that in the end all chaos becomes silence. This painting looks like a slow sunset, on breathing, which gradually slows down, until it turns into peace, in a universe where there are no more contrasts. There is no movement. This is not the end in the usual sense. And dissolution, the transition from form to the absence of form. Perhaps this is the natural outcome of existence. Not death, but a return to balance. But balance is also a stop. And nature, it seems, cannot stand still, even at rest, even in complete balance. A movement is born anyway, at least in the form of a random fluctuation. Quantum breathing, a spark that is enough, so that everything starts again. The big gap tells a different story. Not about peace, but about strength, which knows no boundaries. About the space that does not calm down. But on the contrary, he is going crazy, stretching itself to infinity. If it's death, it's old age. That big divide, that frenzy of youth. There is no slow decay in it. There is only the rapid disappearance of everything that ever existed. But there is a pattern to this too. If the universe is truly filled with energy, subscribe to the channel. End of eternity, so that we can continue on this path. Into the silence, beyond the horizon there, where everything ends and begins again.